Hi, everybody. Welcome to our new series, or our next edition in our Are We There Yet series. I'm Anna Stephanie. Great to see everybody. Great to see some new faces. Just briefly want to share with you uh, a little bit about famtech.org and who we are. So, we are an industry association for innovators and partners across the care economy. We have over 200 members, 175 companies represented that have collectively raised about $1 billion. It's our hypothesis that this sector has been overlooked and underinvested in, and that by coming together in a transparent way, we can really increase awareness and make a difference. So thrilled to have you all here today. I want to share some of the other events that we have coming up. If anybody's going to be at ASU GSV in San Diego next week, we'll be having a panel on AI and parenting on the 7th, if you're interested. And then if you're in the New York area on the 16th, we're hosting an in-person event with Age Tech NYC and First Gen Ventures talking about the immigrant and first generation journey as entrepreneurs in the care economy. And then lastly, our next virtual event on April 17th, just the next day, is a panel with some wonderful VC investors in the care space, talking about some of the latest trends and sort of predictions for what's to come in this environment. So stay tuned. Follow us at famtech.org on our LinkedIn page. And would like to invite everybody in the chat to put their name, company, and location just to get a feel for who's all here today. And while you do that, I'll hand it over to Lauren to kick off the event.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. I see a lot of familiar faces on the line. Yay. And folks who joined for prior sessions. As you all know, this is session 4 of the HR We There Yet series, and super excited to have two incredible guest speakers with us today, El Metza and Vivek Reddy. You two don't mind just waving really quickly, and we'll kind of like do more official intros on their bios in a little bit. But in short, really excited to have Elle and Vivek, who are extremely experienced HR and people ops leaders, to come share their insights from the inside about selling into HR, which is today's topic. Okay, so just to make sure for folks who are joining us for the first time that folks knew who I am, I couldn't resist giblifying my profile picture. So this is me in Ghibli style. My toddler is very into Totoro and Kiki's Delivery Service and so forth. But in short, I am our entrepreneur in residence at Famtech and also co-founder of Cocoon. And I won't go too much into my spiel, but other than to say that my experience as a founder is really growing revenue from zero to the first few millions. And so that's really what this series is all about. Okay, so based on popular demand, we're actually going to start this session with a very high level lightning overview of HR roles or vocab, since there's a lot of different roles out there, and also sales cycle 101, meaning like what are even the steps typically in an HR sales cycle and how does that differ by segments? So thank you all for all the input on what you wanted to hear from us here, because that is really helpful. And then we'll save most of the time for our Insights from the Inside session with Elle and Vivek, which I am super excited about. And we will chat lots and lots about their experience buying innovative tech products, and we'll save plenty of time for Q&A. Okay, let us dive in with that. Oh, quickly, just so folks know, Q&A, the way it works is that please feel free to ask questions throughout the conversation. Just either raise your hand, drop it in the chat, and we'll aim to get it to it. Also, if we don't get to it, there is a dedicated Q&A session at the end. So we'll kind of address questions there. And then if there's still more questions, for those of you who are Famtech members, we have our Slack channel and office hours, so definitely leverage that too. Okay, great. So just to quickly recap where we came from, in week 2, we talked about user interviews, how to use that to develop a point of view on key questions like who your early adopter is. Last week, we talked about how, okay, now we've interviewed a bunch of potential customers. we are ready to start sales. How do we do that? This week is, okay, we're selling and our audience is HR leaders. What does that look like? How do we make sure we put our best foot forward? Which is what Elle and Vivek are going to share a little bit about from the inside. Before we go there, though, as promised, wanted to do a quick 101 on HR roles and sales cycle. So this is truly, truly, truly 101. Elle and Vivek, please feel free to chime in at any time with your input on this front. And I'll probably ask you both, since you've been in various stages of these companies throughout your experience working for high growth companies. But the short of it is, I want to actually make an analogy to skiing when we talk about these sales, the experience of selling into orgs of different sizes, because truly, just like there are bunny slopes, green hills, blues and black diamonds, you really don't want to get stuck on a black diamond and be like trying to ski down when you're not quite ready for it. And that's exactly what selling into these different sizes of organizations look like. So just to kind of give folks a lay of the land on how to read this matrix, the way to think about it is the top row is really, think of it as segmentation. So the size of the organization. SMB, so small, medium business, I'm calling this something like sub 500 or so employees. Mid-market, I'm calling this around 500 to call it like low thousands of employees. And so benchling where Vivek leads HR ops at right now is kind of like in that category. Enterprise, several thousand employees. Elle, you've been at DocuSign, for example. That's a great example of like an enterprise company. So just so folks know, like those are some logos you can try and associate with these types of segments. All right, so let's start with just who do you actually see at these companies at different stages, right? So as you might imagine, the number of roles proliferates quite a bit as the company gets larger and larger. And so for a startup, a lot of times, maybe you even have only one kind of like head of HR, right? So for example, Cocoon, we're like a 60-person startup. We have one head of HR. Um, Once you start to get to a little bit, like a few hundred or so people, you start to get some amount of sort of like functional groupings in HR. So for example, you might have a head of HR or people. You may have an HR business partner or two who are folks who are really responsible for working on the ground with employees to support them through any challenging experiences, questions they have, policies, and so forth. You often will have people ops, maybe not a head of people ops like Vivek yet, but a people ops person who is helping with things like systems, for example. So maybe the HRIS system, payroll system, all of that. And then typically you also have some sort of talent or recruiting person who is going to be doing exactly what it sounds like, which is recruiting you into the company and retaining you. Okay, so then what happens when you move up? So, let's just use Benchling as an example. Benchling was a startup, and then now Benchling is a several hundred person company, right? So you start to get oftentimes like different functions. Compensation starts to become its own function a lot of times in these organizations. So you'll see things like a head of total rewards start to pop up. You may see a head of benefits start to pop up. And what those terms mean is that these leaders are responsible for our compensation. So determining things like, hey, how much is my salary? What do benefits look like in terms of health insurance? Benefits like leave, for example, benefits like mental health benefits, for example. And so for many of you on the line, I'm just kind of like looking in the chat and seeing who's here. A lot of you are kind of like building things that could be benefits, right? So when you're selling into the mid-market, a lot of times your target audience is going to be someone like with a title like head of total rewards or head of benefits. And Elle has had various of those titles in her long and storied history of leading these functions at high growth tech companies. So we can dive a lot more into that in our fireside chat too. Okay, so then what happens when you go to enterprise? Then you start getting even more titles and functions. So that's when you start getting some pretty interesting specialized functions. Like, for instance, in the space that Anna and I were building in leave management, you would start to see heads of leave and absence, very specific role, because there's enough there that you can actually hire a full-time person to be doing that or managing that, whatever vendor or solution they have. You might even see things like director of mobility, learning and development functions. And so if anyone's building in the space of education, often learning and development might be a good place to be selling into. Okay, and then as you can see throughout this experience, you often are also touching cross-functional partners like finance, legal, eventually up to things like procurement and IT and enterprise, who are really, really, really important partners during the process of buying a new solution. All right, I'm going to pause there. Elle or Vivek, anything you would add to this?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, when you get to mid-market, you don't lose the cross-functional partners of finance and legal. You just keep adding. So now in mid-market, you're doing finance, legal, and maybe there's like a heavy security. And then when you get to enterprise, it's all of them and it's procurement and IT. So the table that you're sitting at, if you're doing this live or virtually, like gets very large. And sometimes you're in a meeting with 10 people from the organization you're selling to if you're thinking about enterprise. And sometimes that's really intimidating. And so, like, it's just important to know who's in the room, what their roles are, how long they've been at that company. There's so much research that goes into your first meeting. If you can get a list of who's going to be there, and beforehand, check that stuff out. That's always a really important part of this sales process. It's just not knowing what you do. You have to know what they do too.
Yes, know your customer.
Yep.
Yeah, and then the only thing I would add is I'd say even at the mid-market level, in the last probably 1 to 2 years, there's been, I'd say IT as well as procurement has probably been getting involved at a slightly earlier stage as well. There's been a lot more scrutiny around software spend and making sure that that from I'd say that from a IT as well as financial perspective that we're not going overboard, and that we're trying to consolidate. So you might see that crop up actually like around the mid-market stage a little bit more frequently than we have in the past.
That's a really good trend to call out, Vivek, especially as folks are thinking about how current economic environment and so forth has affected this. All right, great. So let's now go to sales cycle. So so folks know who are new to the world of sales, what does sales cycle actually mean? When we say sales cycle, we mean how long does it take from when you start to have a conversation with Elle or Vivek to potentially buy your solution, and you've qualified them as a buyer who has a need for your solution, right? Let's say leave management, to then actually have a signed contract in hand. Now, as you can see in the enterprise column, it can be a very lengthy time period. Um, but typically in SMB, it's somewhere on the order of, call it, 1 to 3 months. And a lot of times, the reason that these sales cycles lengthen is because of some of the other factors in this chart, right? So like, why does it lengthen when you go to mid-market to 3 months to a year? Why does it lengthen when you're in enterprise to a year or maybe even more than a year? A lot of times it's because of the roles and titles thing, where there's a lot more people around the table that you have to build influence and consensus with than when you're in enterprise, than when you're in SMB. And then also, it could also be affected by things like seasonality. And so, small businesses, a lot of times they can buy kind of whenever they have a need, right? But once you start to get to mid-market and enterprise, and I'm sure, like Vivek and Elle, are experiencing this, which is a lot of times there's a cycle or a cadence that the company is going through that the entire organization needs to follow. So just to give an example of a typical cycle in the enterprise world, oftentimes what happens is that January through April is kind of like the buying season where it's like, okay, great. Vivek, Al are going to be open to hearing from you all as founders, hearing you pitch, like hearing what ideas and solutions you have that could help them solve their problems, because that's kind of like an open period. But once you start to get to June, October, you're already starting to be prepping for what's called open enrollment, which is when people are essentially saying, like, I'm sure many of us who've been employees at companies have heard, like, hey, open enrollment, like get to know your benefits, sign up for benefits, all of that stuff. That's a very, very, very busy time for people teams. And so that's typically not a good time to be selling into an organization of enterprise size. And then October and January are very, very busy in terms of folks being very heads down on implementing and going live with whatever they had decided to purchase. So I know, Vivek, this was maybe like a few years ago, but went through like a very intense workday process that I'm sure took you months to get up and running. So if you try to catch Vivek during that time, he probably wasn't really very responsive. Vivek, anything you'd add?
Yeah, I'd say typically like, both early stage as well as kind of the stage that we're at. I've typically seen either open enrollment, fiscal year, or even like fiscal quarters sometimes as like kind of like the earmarks for when, we'd be open towards kind of implementing something new. But I'd say definitely like fiscal year open enrollment is probably the majority of things that we purchase. We try to align for that. If you are like a benefits vendor, I would argue that for open enrollment, usually that's around like November timeframe. So probably the sweet spot of selling is like early summer. That's kind of when we would be making decisions for what we want to move forward with for that next calendar year.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good highlight, Vivek. Also, Elle, that t-shirt is hilarious.
Yeah, it says enterprise on the front, and then on the back it's like I'm worth the long sales cycle. And I think for me too, I as a total rewards leader go into an organization and build out an 18-month roadmap. So I'm already planning out kind of what I'm thinking I want to do for 18 months at a time. So and it's obviously updating month over month, but if you're not sort of in my roadmap, if the thing that you're building, your solution, doesn't innovate in the space I'm trying to solve for, your sales cycle might even be longer than that because I have to go figure out how do you fit in. So the best thing for companies to do is kind of try to fit into my 18-month roadmap, see if there's alignment. Oh, I do a thing that solves for this that you're trying to do for your Jan 1, effective. Change in benefits. The reality is, though, that that's actually really hard because if it's on my roadmap, I probably have already thought out with my consultants who I'm going to look at to solve for that. So if you're a new player in the space, I say like your sales cycle with me might be a year or so, 18 months. You should be 2 years in advance having conversations with consultants and brokers to make sure they're aware. So they're getting you into my radar as I'm building out this roadmap. So it's a long process when we're talking 10,000 plus employees.
That roadmap piece, Al, is really, really good color because I think a lot of folks don't realize that if you're not part of one of these thematic pillars, right? I think I remember you having these pillars, right? When you were at DocuSign as an example of just priorities for the company. And if you haven't pre-influenced that pillar, then you're not likely to be getting a ton of attention.
That's right. And the only time I've ever found really a great innovator that's kind of breaking through my roadmap is when they can address a problem I didn't know I had. So when we're thinking about healthcare and cost of certain types of claims, if there's stuff that I'm missing, my consultant's missing, and you can shed some light on that, you could potentially get to the front of the line. So also thinking about how are people looking at the problem that you're solving for? Maybe they're missing stuff, right? Can you help them, educate them to see things in a different way? I love that. I love being told I'm missing something and then it being right and then me doing something about it, right? It makes me look good too.
Yeah, great color. Okay. So let's now go to that last row around assets. So assets, think of it as just like there are more people and more different roles and titles at a company as it gets larger, you also have to tailor your assets. You have to bring more assets to the table as you're having conversations with all of these different stakeholders, right? So at the SMB level, you're really talking about, making sure the buyer, like L or Vivek, understands the problem, the solution really well. You have a great demo that's super exciting for them. You're walking them through pricing, they understand the return on their investment, and then you got your contract, right? Sometimes there's a little bit of other stuff there too, but it's kind of like the basics of like, what do I need to know to buy? And then in the mid-market though, that's when you start having things like, hey, I need to really understand what integrations and how do you integrate with the rest of my systems, right? So like, for example, at Benchling, Vivek uses Workday, right? So like, how do you interact with Workday? How do I make sure that that's seamless, right? Implementation, you need to understand, okay, how are you going to actually set your system up to go live at my company? And then security is very, very important. So oftentimes you'll see demands for certifications like SOC 2 starting around the mid-market, if not a little bit earlier, actually. Once you get to enterprise, I like to just like plus everything essentially. Anyone who's gone through this will know it's like sort of like a plus nightmare, but essentially you start to get like massive security questionnaires, and you might have to be throwing in acronyms like BAAs and HIPAAs and so forth, depending on the what you're selling and what your solution is and what kind of private P, PII, so to speak, or confidential information you may have. Implementation is also becomes like literally consulting affair. Anna knows this from her time with LeaveLogic and Unum, which is you start to have literally statements of work for implementation. And it's like a multi-month statement of work that almost involves this whole services and consulting team. And then, of course, procurement is a really important player here, where at the enterprise level, you're often even building decks tailored to procurement teams. So you might be building a deck that says, hey, if you sign within this time frame, you get this discount. If you sign a multi-year contract, you get a discount. That's all pre-planned and pre-tailored to that particular team.
I
Go
yeah, I was
ahead.
gonna say I'm gonna add two things too, and not just on enterprise, but if procurement is going to be part of the process, like some organizations require that procurement has done their due diligence. I try really hard from a benefits perspective to keep them out because I have a consultant already, and so we're already negotiating best pricing, which is sometimes really all they're looking for is do we have the best vendor, and the best pricing. But if they have to be there, get them in early, because if for some reason they get to nix this and they have no idea what it is that you do or what this company is doing, they're just looking at the bare bones and they nix it, that's a lot of work that you've put in your sales process that goes to waste. And I've seen it happen one too many times. So I will try to remind folks like, hey, procurement needs to get involved. Let's invite them to this meeting. And they like to sort of be involved when I'm still in an RFP process even, right? So as I'm looking at multiple vendors. So this will be before decisions are even made to go with you. So don't forget them as you're looking at enterprise, or just ask everybody, does procurement have to make the decision too? Please invite them. And then back in contracting, right? So everyone has to do a contract. When you get into enterprise, sometimes they want you to get very creative and they want to go on someone else's paper. And so this has to be something, especially around healthcare, that you think about. If we're using Blue Cross Blue Shield, Anthem, Cigna, United Healthcare, and you are delivering a healthcare product that is going to be running on claims, could we also sign paper through our established relationship with a healthcare provider? So do you have partnerships, right? Like, so we're going to start asking you questions around, do you have established partnerships? Are you already working with this vendor with any other customers? Could we do this so that I'm just signing an addendum or amendment to my Cigna contract as opposed to signing something brand new with you? And the reason I ask that is generally because I already like what you're doing and I want to work with you. And two, it'll be easier to get across the board if we can use someone else's paper. So just something to be thoughtful about as you start selling to larger employers. How can you get creative around contracting? I think the same thing goes with integrations, right? Like if you can get the data from my third-party vendor who already has it, don't ask me to touch Workday. The less that I have to do, the more likely I am to sign with you.
Those are really good tips, Elle. And I see a question in the chat. Shannon, do you want to come off mute briefly if you're available to ask it?
Yeah. So, we were working on our go-to-market and we're fairly a new concept. So we're thinking that in order to really start partnering with these organizations, we're going to need to do a pilot project. So when we're talking about a sales cycle, and all these things, which I agree with, I used to work in two large Fortune 200 companies trying to buy products. So even though I wasn't in HR, I understand that completely. But does the process change if we're pursuing a pilot project?
I mean, I have some initial thoughts. It depends, right? So I think that if in the pilot project, I don't have to start an integration, right? We're going to go direct to our target employees, give them some marketing materials, have them sign up directly with you. And so they're opting in by signing up, and you don't need me to integrate any information. That's going to slow down the process quite a bit, right? So assuming you don't need an integration from me, this could be easy, right? And we've pre-vetted that these people are employees, and somehow you're keeping that up to date. So if they leave the organization, they're no longer part of the pilot. The other thing, is contracting. It depends on sort of if you're going to charge me, right? Are you doing a free pilot? Like, oh, we just want your data, right? And so there's an even exchange here. We get the data. We're not going to charge you. Okay, procurement's probably not involved. Like, there's a couple other things that can happen that make it a little bit easier. If you are going to charge me, yeah, I mean, I'm probably still going to have to go through the motions of, procurement, and then potentially even, all the finance pieces of creating the POs and getting those approved and having the budget approved. So it gets really almost as difficult. I actually don't do a ton of pilots at enterprise. When I was at mid-market and definitely at SMB, pilots all day, because I definitely didn't need to do a lot of the work. Enterprise makes it a little bit harder. So if you can target smaller organizations and maybe more of them, that would be ideal. But if you really need enterprise size for a pilot because you're looking for, 1,000 members to go through the program, because probably only 15 of them are really going to use it, and you need that kind of data, then you're looking at pretty close to the same amount of sales cycle. It does
Okay.
make obviously the final sale easier though.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. That answered my question.
Great.
Vivek, anything that you'd add?
Yeah, I would just say like at the SMB and then mid-market level, I would say the more that you can define like and kind of like decrease the surface area of that pilot, I think that greatly helps. So just like a very defined problem that you're looking to solve makes my life a lot easier. Like it's like I can then pitch to like my boss really easily and be like, hey, there's this one problem that we're like trying to solve. And then also I think actually those constraints help you a lot. It just like forces you to like really, really nail one like use case. And I'd say in general, I think that's actually much more beneficial for any kind of newer launch. And then over time, you can kind of broaden what that looks like. But that does make it a lot easier at the earlier stages.
That
Yeah.
makes sense. Thanks.
Awesome. Great question, Shannon. I know pilots are top of mind for a lot of us since many of us are in that early stage of getting our first 1 to 2 logos. Okay, great. So that is kind of the 101 on HR roles and sales cycles. And as Elle and Vivek will tell you, we could go on about this forever. But given that we have our two amazing, very, very experienced people leaders on the line, I want to make sure we get to our fireside chat portion of this conversation. Before that, though, want to make a quick plug for FamTech. So as you all heard from Anna, FamTech, we're an amazing nonprofit organization, really focused on what folks are building in this room around the care economy. And it's really easy to join for membership. So just check out the link over on that slide to apply. And for those of you who are members, keep interacting with us in our Slack channel that's dedicated to this bootcamp series. All right, let's go to our amazing panel, Insights from the Inside. So we've already gotten some really good gems of insight from Elle and Vivek in the prior conversation here, but I just want to more officially kind of introduce who Elle and Vivek are, because they truly, truly are very, very kind of unique unicorn type of people in this people world. There are very few people leaders and HR leaders who are going to be early adopters of new technology. You have to truly be quite visionary to do that, because who's going to be like, hey, Lauren, you have no customers. You're literally 3 women with a laptop. I'm going to buy your product. Vivek, thank you. But, it's risky, right? And so Vivek and Elle have a track record of bringing these new solutions that are innovative into their organizations, being able to influence other people in the organization to say yes. And I really want you all to hear from them on what does that look like? How do you work with them and innovators like them to do that, right? So Elle, as I mentioned, has been many years total rewards leader and benefit leaders at tons of different companies that are extremely high growth. I first met Elle when she was actually my head of benefits at Stripe. She's gone on to be at many amazing companies like DocuSign, for example. Elle is also an advisor to a ton of early stage tech companies and has been really a key just champion of the FamTech effort. So thank you, Elle, for being with us. And Vivek, as you all probably have guessed, was one of my first customers at Cocoon, and couldn't be more grateful. He had recently joined Benchling. Cocoon was brand new. We were just starting to have our first conversations, and Vivek, very similar, has led people ops at a lot of high growth companies like Segment that got acquired by Twilio, Benchling most recently, and is just an absolute expert in this world, especially if you want to talk anything about integrations, people systems, and so forth. He is your guy. Okay, so with that, I want to actually start. I have a bunch of questions for Vivek and Elle, and then we'll also, of course, make sure that our audience, team members, and get some dedicated time to ask questions as well. But if anyone has questions, please just drop them in the chat or raise your hand throughout as well. I want to actually start with just your personal stories, Elle and Vivek, because I find it very interesting to know what has motivated you to become a people and HR leader. Like, why did you even go into that role in the first place? So, Elle, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, my background, I studied theater and film in college, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna be a star. But what I learned in doing that is that I actually really like talking about things that I understand. And so I wanted to share and impart knowledge. And so I thought, oh, maybe I could be a teacher. I don't know, like we'll see what happens. I tried, working in the field and realized that I needed to put food on the table, and the arts did not support that. So I got a job for General Electric back in the day when they had started selling long-term care insurance, and I realized, oh, what it actually is that I want to do is help people. And so I think I triggered some sort of empathy bone in my body and went, "Oh, what's the way that I can do that? How can I help people and impart knowledge and share ideas and be in a space where people appreciate that?" And so I had been on the, solution side for a while. I got in and did some consulting for a while. And then my first job in-house is when I realized, oh, this is my largest impact. And I really can actually visually see what I'm doing to change people's lives. And it was in tech. So I grew up in the Bay Area. And I really stuck in this field because tech allowed me to be that innovative person that you described, right? They said, hey, we're doing well. We figured things out. We need to hire the best talent in San Francisco. That's obviously really hard. How can we do that? And I thought, total rewards, comp ben is the way to do it. It's also our highest spend. And so I had to be really thoughtful about how I did that. And it allowed me to have the creative juices that I loved and where I started my career, but also to really impact change and do things that are really meaningful for people. And then throughout my career, I had my own family, I had kiddos, I have a kiddo with special needs. And then I started getting even more specific about like how I wanted to help people. I wanted to help those that were most disadvantaged, and by proxy was helping everybody, right? And I think that that's been my most recent sort of foray into benefits and total rewards, is looking at the most disadvantaged in my organizations, helping them, and then making sure that everyone else also reaps those rewards.
Thank you for that, Elle. I think the key takeaway that I have from your story is the theme around helping people, whether it was like, I want to be a teacher, or when you were kind of leading these organizations, because one, it's the amount of influence that as people leaders you both have on people's lives is huge, right? Like literally our healthcare is in your hands as an example, right? And so I think it's really, really key, but also to understand kind of like what drives you and motivates you, right? And when a founder is having a conversation with you, what's going to like really light up your heart.
Yeah, absolutely.
Vivek, how about you?
Yeah. My first tech job, I was employee number one at a recruiting tech company. So actually, like my first 3.5 years, I was on the revenue side of the house. So I started in sales, was in marketing, was in customer success. So kind of really learned a lot of like kind of revenue components of things. But in that process, I learned a lot. Like I actually almost saw kind of a one-to-one comparison of like how you generate sales pipeline, very similar towards how you generate recruiting pipeline. And kind of there's just like a lot of those same corollaries towards people orgs. And in that process, I kind of learned like actually probably the biggest roadblock for companies as they start scaling is everything around how they manage people. So how they bring people in, how they manage them once they join, how they keep and retain excellent folks. And I saw like a lot of companies that have leaky buckets, and I was like, hey, this can be done better. So I moved towards the like actually, let's say originally talent side. It's probably on talent for like 4-ish years. And then when I was at Segment, I transitioned over from that towards HR. And my HR experience is like more of, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, more of the left brain components of stuff. So systems, comp, benefits, like that's kind of where I focused. But I just always felt like, hey, there was like a really good way for us to systemize a lot of that stuff, and kind of just like up level, I think, like how people orgs were thinking about stuff in a way that was similar to what you'd see on the revenue side.
It's fascinating how your revenue background actually influenced how you think about topics like talent, retention, and acquisition, because the leaky bucket analogy, Vivek, is like such a good one where just like in sales, where you have a funnel, right? In talent, retention, acquisition, you're constantly worrying about how's your recruiting pipeline doing and how's your retention doing, right? And that's really relevant to a lot of founders and leaders in this group because we're often pitching something that has to do with helping you with acquisition of talent or retention of that talent.
Yep, absolutely.
Hmm. Well, I want to kind of double click a bit more. We started talking about the buyer's journey inside HR teams, and both of you gave us a little bit of insight around things like, hey, like, is this actually different if you have a pilot, or is it really the same thing? Elle, I thought your kind of point about like your um, themes that when you were, in enterprise organization, those being something you have to pre-influence was really, really useful. But I kind of want to get a little bit more concrete. So, Vivek, can you think back to a time that you bought a new solution at Benchling? And it could be Cocoon or it could be something else more recent,
Mhm.
and what that involved. Because I think a lot of times folks want to kind of get their brains wrapped around, okay, like who did you need to get bought in besides you? How did you get budget? Like what was timing of the go live? Like how was that determined? Can you give us a little bit of color on what that looked like for you?
Yeah, I can talk about Cocoon, which I think will hit more on the SMB segment, which you shared, because I believe we were like maybe 250 at that
Yeah,
point.
roughly.
And then I can actually touch base on something I purchased recently that was kind of more mid-market stage, and kind of you can notice what the core or what the differences are. Cocoon, like at that point, we were transitioning away from using a PEO towards like having like most of our systems in-house. But one of the things that like TriNet used to do for us was manage leaves. But when we were transitioning away, I was like, oh crap, like we don't have anything for this, and I don't like have like that much headcount, and I really don't want to deal with this. So it was this is where I say that like having a very specific problem that you're solving, if that hits on something that is like very prescient for me, like I will listen. And especially at the early stage, like we were able from I think my first conversation with you like to going live, I think it took what 3 months max.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
and honestly, probably could have been faster, but like I kind of wanted to time it for this January 1 anyways. So like at that stage, we were able to move really quick because there was a very specific need. I didn't have a solution already, and there was maybe a couple other players, but I actually really liked the idea of like partnering and kind of building something together. And you know, I was able to speak to, hey, certain specific problems that I had, and we kind of layered our problems. I was like, hey, the most important thing for me right now is just like parental leaves, but then that layered into medical leaves, that layered into kind of covering different states. So we started small and then branched out, and I think that allowed us to kind of get something out the door quick, and then over time, kind of layer that upwards really, really quickly. Um, a separate product that I bought recently. So we recently purchased Athena for like training kind of LMS type of thing. And we had like a bunch of like disparate systems across like, I mean, anyone who's dealt with like LMS systems, it's like one of the most just super annoying problem. And like at least in my experience, I haven't seen anything that's been like super comprehensive until you get really, really enterprise. And we just didn't have anything great for that. But despite the fact that I had to coordinate with like IT, with like security, etc., it was like a very nagging problem for us because it was actually making it challenging for us around compliance, like around our SOC 2, around like any sort of certifications that like we needed, customer audits. So there was a very prescient need again there of like, hey, we have something specific that's like that I'm looking to solve for. I don't like my current solutions. And if you have something that's speaking to that, and then you have all the documentation so that I can kind of bring along all the other departments. That allowed me to kind of make that purchase probably in about 4 months. So like pretty quickly, from like start to finish.
Yeah. I think one of the themes that I'm hearing, Vivek, is this prescient need phrase, right? Which is like there's something that makes you especially like ready to look at something in leave management, or something especially ready to look at something in LMS world, right? And I think what was interesting about what you shared on the Cocoon story, for example, that we later used as part of kind of like our sales process, is these transition points that sometimes organizations go through where, let's say you're transitioning systems of some sort, right? So you all were transitioning from a PEO, TriNet, thank you, Anna, for dropping that definition in the chat, to using your own kind of systems and doing your own HR and all of that stuff. And that was actually a really, really good entry point timing for us. I mean, accidental on our part, but it turned out to be a very, very good timing because suddenly you're like, this thing that someone else used to do for me, I have to figure out myself now. Yeah. And I see a question from Jay Vest in the chat. How did Vivek and I first connect? Good question. We actually met through one of our investors who knew Meg, who is the chief people officer at Benchling. And Meg was like, I have an amazing person for you to talk to, Vivek, who just joined on to lead the people ops. So the short of it is you could connect through investors. My favorite story of connecting to people is just like literally anyone in your network. So Mural, who was also one of our early customers at Cocoon, I connected with their head of people through my cousin or my husband's cousin. It's like a couple different hops through that, right? But literally, like you got to be combing everyone in your network.
Yeah, I'd
Great.
say for me, referrals, or actually I've had a couple cases where someone just like they listened to something like either that I wrote or that I talked about or that they saw online, and they had an extremely tailored like initial outreach message. And I was like, yeah, actually like the fact that you were able to pick up on that without knowing me, I was like, okay, like I'll like take a conversation with you.
Yeah, so like extremely tailored cold outreach, but they better have like listened to a podcast that you
Yeah.
that we're on, right?
Mhm.
I also think just be in the spaces that I exist already. So, I mean, I don't mind a DM, in my LinkedIn, but when I was at DocuSign, you can imagine I was getting 40 to 50 a day. And so, like, was I combing through all of them? Probably not. Like, did you have a cool GIF? Maybe. Was there a cat in it? Okay, I'll probably talk to you. It was random. It was so random. And I didn't love that. I didn't love that experience for myself. So, what I started doing is actually just like, at a conference, and I would try to find more bespoke conferences that were just a bit smaller, were maybe very hyper focused on the thing that I cared about. Be in those spaces, right? Like say hi to everybody, like be nice. Host a dinner and a coffee with zero agenda, right? Like you don't have to sell anything at that event and see if we'll show up, right? I remember I just heard a story. Someone just said, like, I went to the same coffee shop that the head of benefits for Starbucks went to like every morning for his coffee. And then eventually one day he's like, do you work here? The guy's like, I don't. but like, do you have a second to talk? And he did for like 10 minutes. And then he sold him, I don't know, care.com. It was crazy. It was amazing. And I was like, this is like such a funny thing. But actually, half of my story is about how I met someone that I ended up buying from, or that we were together, maybe happenstance. They made me feel like it was happenstance. And the reality is they were just in my space. Like they knew where I was, and not creepily like at my coffee shop, but like, at the conferences that I was speaking at. They attended my talk, even if it had nothing to do about what they were doing, right? Because they wanted to hear me and they cared. And I think that that really shows. And I might not be able to buy your thing, but I'll give you 10 minutes. I'll give you 20 minutes, which is sometimes all you need. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the key question that you highlighted, Elle, is where does your buyer hang out, right? And not necessarily like literally hang out like at a coffee shop, but like what conferences do they hang out at, right? As an example.
Yeah.
Stalking as a
Stocking
service.
the stores. Yeah, please don't. But also if you happen to be like one of the people I met, our kids were in the same soccer league. Like, it's just random. Like and then we started talking, and then they're like, oh, I do a thing. And then I bought the thing, and I was like, I don't even know how that happened. But you never know. And I think always be telling your story. I think that's the thing is like, I forget that thing is ABC. No, yeah, always be closing. It's actually just tell your story. Be a storyteller about what it is you do. Be passionate enough that you could tell your story in your sleep.
That's really good advice.
Yeah.
I see a great question from Kelsey. Kelsey, do you want to come off mute if you're able to ask it?
Yes. So really appreciate the both of you sharing your stories. But really curious, what are the top things you're most concerned about and the kind of problems that you're looking to solve in 2025, 2026 and beyond?
I can give a couple just like I think top of mind things for me. One, anything that helps around audits like is just super, super helpful. Like they get tedious. I have to deal with finance and security a lot. And anything that makes our lives easier around documentation, keeping track of stuff, actually driving compliance, I think is big. Second, I'd say like manager development, like especially with our kind of just like current climate, we want to get the most out of like our leaders and like have them impart really good values, principles, and then as well as accountability towards everyone else. So anything that really drives better leadership out of our managers, I think matters a ton. And the last thing is like in this kind of current mold, I'd say especially for pre-IPO companies, there's just a lot more scrutiny around every headcount. So I think just like there's a lot more focus around performance recently. And one of the things that we've been thinking about for the year is like, hey, like our headcount may not grow like super rapidly. So every single head that we hire for matters a ton. We really want to try to get better at like how can we like predict attrition and how can we get like ahead of those backfills that are going to crop that will crop up. So it's actually getting a little bit into that like prediction game of like, hey, where might we lose people and how can we like really minimize that time between like let's say losing someone and then filling that gap.
Yeah, and I would plus one on the making my lives easier, right? So we're not getting headcount in HR, so we're not growing our teams. We have to do more with less. So I'm looking for solutions that are potentially using AI. I mean, I've not been scared of it. I've been buying AI for 5 years, so well before everyone got really excited about it, because I realized it was the only way I was gonna get everything done that I needed to get done. And again, maybe it was a little easier on enterprise, but solve the real everyday problems from an administration perspective so that I then can go focus on the real big fires that I'm dealing with from a business perspective, because I just don't have the bandwidth to do those until this other stuff's off the plate. Because we have to onboard, we have to pay people, we have to like the administration can't stop. And so if I'm a team of three, like that's really what most of our time is spent doing. And so number one would be that. So plus one. I think for me, if I think with my benefits hat on, it's, if I'm self-funded, if I'm large enough and I'm self-funded, which means I'm paying all of my claims dollar for dollar, I need to reduce the cost of my claims. And so the best way to do that for me is not to just hire a bunch of healthy people, because that's impossible, but to understand where I'm spending my money. And so I'm looking at ways to aggregate my data so that I know what I can be doing each year. And so as I'm building out my 18-month roadmap, again, my favorite thing, it's like, okay, high cost claims. And I'm not depending on my broker and consultant to say, oh, here's your top three, claim areas, because the silos or verticals that they create don't always really address, I think, the whole picture. So I actually want access to my own data. So if you're doing something that gives me more access to my own data, thank you. And I want to be able to put them into groupings that make sense for me. And then to tie them into maybe some of my business goals or personal goals for health and welfare and meaningful benefits. So for me, 2025 is the year of women's health. So I'm thinking about, where am I spending money around women's health, around children, families, and are there ways that I can reduce our costs so that, one, I get the yes from my executive team, from my CFO to invest in those things. And then two, I'm doing the thing that we keep promising we're going to do that we haven't yet done. So I'm marrying those two things together. So if there's solutions out there that are helping me do that, to see both my data, to build the story, and then to solve the problem, I'm looking at those, and I want to move forward with them. And then lastly, I think the other big thing, and this is more on the comp side, is thinking about how we can be innovative in the comp space. I think we all comp the same way, right? So there are benchmarks, there are, ranges that we use, and we're all pulling our data from Radford or whomever, right? The same 6 people that have this data, and we're hoping that enough of us are putting the data in so that the data coming out, the benchmarking, is accurate. But if we're all paying sort of the same range based on sort of size and all of that, like, are we really doing anything innovative? My answer to that is no, right? So are you doing something that allows me to innovate in the space that you own? So around comp, for me, it's like, could I at scale get really personalized in how I'm remunerating my employees, right? Have we defined currency in a way that is broad enough that people coming in might go, well, I'm having kids this year, so I just need cash. Give me as much cash as possible, right? Or, oh, I'm young and don't have anything going on. I'm not planning on buying a house in the next 10 years, give me equity, right? Or actually my benefits matter most, right? I've got a health condition, like, give me a better benefit plan, give me an HRA, give me these kinds of things. I can't at scale actually create mixes like that. So if you're building something that allows me to be innovative in how I do what I already do, I will probably sit down and have a great conversation with you.
Thank you.
Mm.
Thank you both so much. It sounds like you're both looking for predictive analytics on total compensation and rewards-based decision making. But appreciate the really thoughtful feedback.
And also, I think the themes around the current climate are really interesting as far as how that drives what's top of mind for Vivek and Elle as well. Great question, Kelsey. Okay, we have a question from Sam. Sam, if you're able to and want to, do you want to come off mute to ask it?
Yeah, happy to. 2 questions. What are some of the negative feelings you experience when trying to introduce a new vendor partner to your team? We often run into the fact that you're excited, but you might have some hesitations to then get your colleagues or your boss to come and take a look at it. So that's kind of the first one. And then later on in the stages, you're okay, we love these guys. We love everything about them, but we have some hesitations. And what are those usually?
I'll maybe just start on a couple of things. So, if I am excited by someone, I generally don't have a hesitation to introduce them to other folks on my team, unless it's like the thing that they solve for has nothing to do with me, right? So if you're saying, oh, I've made this relationship with you, I do something in L&D and L doesn't own L&D, and so I'm just passing you off. The hesitation is, I might not really understand what my L&D team is trying to solve for, and is this a waste of their time, right? You might have a great solution, you might be a great person, but if I don't know what they're focused on, that would be a hard thing for me to just say, let me hand you off, right? And 9 times out of 10, I'll do it without you in copy. And I'll just say, if you want, message this guy. Here are the 3 things I like. It's not really a vote of confidence, right? And it doesn't really feel like that's going to turn into very much. And so I would put it on you as the salesperson to go figure out, is my L&D team trying to solve for this before you ask for the introduction, because that would reduce the hesitation for me to do the introduction. You can be like, oh, I heard XYZ person at this conference say that they're really trying to solve for this. And, we've built this relationship. I want to help you. I want to help your organization. I care about all of you. like, would you introduce me? 100% I would. Yeah, that's going to narrow sort of my like off-putting feeling of like, am I doing the right thing? I also think that when I get to that point where I have gotten to really like a vendor and it's like I could see us doing this. The only reason that I'm not pushing forward again is if there's a misalignment on what I should be focusing on, because what I want to focus on and what I should be focusing on sometimes aren't the same thing. So the minute I reduce the friction around the conversation being everybody's fire, we're fine. Like, so that again, like, what is it that you do that can very clearly align to what the company's goals are? I'll introduce you to my CEO. It doesn't matter, right? You're solving for something that they care about. But if I can't find the tie between that, again, this is where almost all my hesitation ever comes from, is that it's just because I want to do it. Like, yes, my CEO, my CFO have hired me because they trust me and that I'm the best, but to maintain that trust, I need to not waste their time. So don't make me waste their time and I won't hesitate.
Mm.
Yeah, we'll like echo a lot there. I'd say like most hesitancy from me comes from cross-functional partners, like just like, hey, like you might be addressing my needs really well, but like haven't like either given enough thought or just we like don't have a great enough understanding of how that might impact like let's say security or IT or maybe any other team that would be a stakeholder of finance. So like for example, like if you have some sort of solution around something compensation and or benefits related, but it's really really good for like employees, but you haven't factored in like all of the intricacies around dealing with payroll, that's probably going to be like a blocker for me because like payroll, like we have to administer this, and if it's going to cause like a lot of issues for them, um, like I'm not going to be able, to like say yes. Um, Second, around hesitancy for me, if it's with me personally, it's usually something around like, hey, there's a specific thing that works, but it requires way too much change on my part. So like, I would have to like you know, update how we do integrations, update our systems, and it's like a far more wholesale change than like what I like originally expected. That would be where personal hesitancy would most likely come from for me.
This is super helpful. I think the alignment with needs is really key. And gosh, I wish we could talk about this forever. But crazy enough, we have 1 minute left in this conversation. I know those of us who are online, first of all, thank you everyone for being so incredibly engaged. Um, as part of our tradition, we like to wrap up with just one takeaway that you've gained from today. So, Elle and Vivek, I hope you don't mind. I giblified both of you as well as like a fun wrap up to today. But I would also love to solicit a volunteer to share one takeaway to take us home for the day. So please raise your hand or drop something in the chat on what, if anyone has something they want to share.
Yeah, it just, this is Shannon. I'm the hobo looking one.
Yes, please. Go,
So
Shannon.
it just confirmed that in this space, especially, and I think all of us are working for a startup in the family, family centric community, that we really need to go find the early adopters. So it's that. So and you basically are confirming the highly targeted, personalized messages is you really got to go out, you got to figure out their problem, and you have to really not can't say generic stuff. They're just gonna go straight to trash, or they're not gonna take you seriously. So that's the question, is how do you find the early adopters? So maybe that's a topic for next time.
Amazing. Well, on that note, let's say thank you to Vivek and Elle for being early adopters of many solutions in this community and appreciate everyone's time, questions. Excited to continue the conversation on LinkedIn and Slack. And while we're on that topic, our events lead, Dakia, is going to drop in the chat really quickly just how to stay in touch with Vivek and Elle. So thank you, everyone, and have a great week.